Coming up, Tim Tebow's got a bold suggestion for Alabama's quarterbacks. Will Tide fans agree? We'll talk about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. It's the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. SEC Media Days is going this week. A lot of SEC coaches saying some stuff. A lot of other coaches trying not to say anything. We'll cover it all as it happens just right down the road from where we are right now.
Yeah, it feels weird. It honestly is interesting to have it here in Atlanta. I was down near the SEC Summerfest yesterday. Got to see some of those things that were going on. It feels like SEC football season is here.
Yeah, it does.
I don't want to jump on it too early, but it feels like it's here.
It's one of those corner polls that you have to round to get the season started. In fact, let's begin here. Item number 1 on our SEC Country Live First in 10 list with someone who made some news by not being at SEC Media Days. I mean former Florida Gator quarterback and current SEC Network analyst Tim Tebow, who's playing minor league baseball. And by the way, Tebow has been doing pretty well lately.
Yes, he is doing really well.
Y'all watch out for Tim Tebow. He's been doing pretty well, but he couldn't be with the SEC Nation brethren, his TV teammates, as they broadcast from Atlanta this week, instead having to weigh in on ESPN from the side of some random minor league baseball game. But he was asked about the state of the Alabama quarterback competition with Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. And Tim Tebow, who knows a little something about sharing time at quarterback, going back to his first year of Florida with Chris Leak in what was a national championship season, by the way, has a little bit of a bold suggestion for what he thinks Alabama should do. I find this to be very interesting because who it comes from. Bama fans, listen to Tim Tebow and decide if you agree here.
I put Jalen as quarterback, as halfback, as wildcat back, as H-back. I move him around. You know, he can be so versatile. You can turn it into a zone read. He can turn it into a receiver. He can do so many different things. But I also want to give Jalen a lot of credit because he hasn't pouted this offseason. He's gone to work. He's reached out to so many people and tried to seek advice. You know, I've talked with him a lot. He's gone to the Manning Academy. He's continued to work on his craft. He hasn't kind of touted it all. He's been dedicated, and I think that if he stays at Alabama, I think he's going to be a huge asset to that Alabama team. And I think there's a way to have these two players on the field at the same time.
That's kind of a money line there at the end.
Yes, it is.
A way to have both Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts on the field at the same time. I'm thinking that Alabama fans probably agree with that. And I've told you before that in person, Jalen Hurts may be the most impressive running quarterback I've ever seen just because of that big old body and the way that he's able to use it to make people miss. I mean, he looks like a football player. I mean, he really looks like a football player when he tucks that football and takes off and runs with it. What could possibly go wrong with Tua and Jalen in the field at the same time? I mean this.
A lot could go wrong. And listen, I love that Tebow has come out and said this. I think that scenario for me, at least talking to a lot of Alabama fans, I think that scenario becomes a fairy tale scenario. I think you look at it and say, boy, it'd be great if that played out. And I think that when you talk about those kind of things, and Tim Tebow obviously knows the position better than anybody. He knows what you could do as an H-back. He knows what you could do with a lot of different scenarios as far as the offense goes. I just think that when you look at those scenarios, Bama has good H-backs. They've got good slot receivers. They've got good running backs. And while I think Jalen's a great football player, and you mentioned it, listen, Jalen and I think Tua both don't get enough credit for what they are in stature. I think when you talk about the stature and what they're able to do, you don't understand how big these guys actually are because the rest of the players on the field are pretty big. These are big guys, and they are able to do a couple of different things. And yes, I'd love to see Jalen with his ball in different situations. The question I have, is Varian Hurts okay with that? Is Jalen Hurts okay with that? That's the big question for me. Yes, I'd love to see it happen. We've been told that Jalen Hurts is a QB1 and that he wants to be a starting quarterback, and for those reasons, I have to question a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I don't necessarily know that Jalen Hurts' dad is going to be okay with that. I don't know that Jalen Hurts himself is going to be okay with that because quarterback's one of those positions, and there are a few positions in football like this. Cornerback compared to safety is a little bit like this. Left tackle compared to guard is a little bit like this. Quarterback more so than anything else. If you're a quarterback, you want to play quarterback. But if you can't play quarterback and get to the NFL, then really what's the point?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like you want to go play quarterback for, Middle Tennessee State, and you can be the QB. You can be QB1 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I'm just using that as a for instance. But what do you really get for that?
Yeah.
If you could be this sort of creative, Swiss Army knife for Alabama, isn't that a better life overall? And maybe that gives you a better chance of playing for the national championship?
Yeah, I think it does. And that's what I've said a million times in the show this offseason, and it keeps coming back to that. Jalen needs to decide what Jalen's going to be. Jalen has to make that decision for himself. Does Jalen think he's a starting quarterback, and does he want to get to the NFL as a quarterback? If that's his goal, then by all means, that's the goal he should chase. He should not give up that dream. But if Jalen wants to get to the NFL no matter what, if Jalen wants to win another national title at Alabama, then you've got to make some changes, I think, because like it or not, Tua Tagovailoa is not going away. Tua Tagovailoa might be the backup quarterback this year. Jalen might win the job, but Tua's going to be there. And guess what? You're going to have to answer those questions all year.
Jeremy Pettis on Facebook says you would definitely put a package together for Jalen Hurts to surprise a few teams. I almost wonder, maybe this isn't just me being too cynical, I almost wonder if the opposite's not true, though. That you have teams thinking you're going to play Jalen Hurts, so they're practicing for it a lot that week. Watch out for Jalen as a tight end. Watch out for him as a running back. Even if you take a little bit of practice time from your opponent and devote it to Jalen Hurts playing another position, the one thing about coaches is they don't want to appear to be seen as getting out-coached. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's not a good use of practice to sort of spend a lot of time worrying about a little thing that might happen during a game. You know, one play for the most part is not going to beat you. It's almost the threat of playing Jalen Hurts at running back or wide receiver or tight end that becomes sort of a more interesting weapon than actually using him there a lot. Although I will admit that I think that Hurts is potentially the kind of athlete he might have a chance to actually go ahead and pull this off.
Yeah, and he's a stout guy. That's what people miss. This is not a quarterback that looks like Lamar Jackson. You want to put him out wide receiver. This is a thick guy. And he's able to do a lot of different things. I just think that this comes down to what does Jalen want to do. I think that's the point that Tim Tebow was trying to make, but I think he missed a little bit. Well, hey, this guy can do a ton of things. But if he doesn't want to do them, then it's not worth taking a look at for Alabama.
Greg Steele, who's a Florida fan, makes a very interesting point in the comment section. I hadn't thought about this. This is a really good point. He says that Tim Tebow is suggesting Jalen Hurts do something that Tebow himself did not want to do in the NFL. Tebow, I'm assuming with the Patriots and the Jets and some of these teams that he played for, I'm assuming he was given many opportunities to change positions, and he didn't want to do it. He consistently sort of referred to himself as a quarterback, wanted to be thought of as a quarterback. So it is at least ironic, maybe even verging on hypocritical, that Tebow is suggesting something for Jalen Hurts, futuring his football career that Tebow himself denied himself the opportunity to do?
I've tried to make this point on the show a couple of times, and it's hard to really make this point without going into NFL contracts and the lockout and what the NFL collective bargaining agreement is. But there is a place in the NFL for guys like Jalen Hurts. There is. I've mentioned Joe Webb a couple of times. There's a couple of other guys in the NFL. It used to be that a third-string quarterback in the NFL didn't count towards your roster. They were paid differently. They were one of those guys that once they entered the game that none of the other quarterbacks could go in. They were just done differently. With the last CBA, that was taken out of the equation. A lot of third-string quarterbacks lost their job, so the wide receivers and other guys on the team had to kind of fill in those roles. You're starting to see it become a deal, and I'm just telling you, if Jalen Hurts thought about doing it, I thought Tebow would end up going that role. If Jalen thought about going down that route, I think he could.
All right, here's Lawrence Robinson on Facebook who says, one game should not decide a quarterback's career. Jalen has lost only one game as a starter. Bama should make the same mistake Auburn did with Jeremy Johnson. Tua might not be durable enough. So let's take Lawrence's point here at face value. Let's say that we don't yet know enough about Tua Tagovailoa. It's kind of a fair point. Let's just assume for a moment that we don't know enough about him. That you've got to sort of prepare, assuming that Jalen Hurts doesn't transfer, you've got to prepare Hurts to also be a quarterback here this season. Could you possibly do that where you prepare him to be a starting quarterback, but if Tua Tagovailoa earns that job, wins that job, plays well enough in the month of September to keep that job, that by the time you got to your crucial November games against LSU and against Auburn and maybe Georgia in the SEC championship come December, could then Jalen Hurts transition to an offensive weapon away from quarterback? Is that too brief a window of time, essentially once the season started until November when Alabama's season really begins? Could you get Jalen Hurts ready to do something besides quarterback in 2 months' time?
It's tough. That's a tough transition to make, and I would think that if it's even a possibility that they're starting to do it a little bit now. You take one of those periods at practice, right? You move around one of those periods at practice and you say, well, you know what? For this period, he's going to go over to the wide receiver position, or for this period, he's going to go over with the running backs. I don't think it's something you just kick off doing in September, though. I think that's a disservice to Jalen to say, hey, you know what? Boy, it wasn't working out here. You go over there this time. I think he needs a little more time than that in order to make sure he's putting his best foot forward.
Morgan Recton says Tebow also said he could see the two-quarterback system working in Alabama like it did at Florida in 2006. And really for me, that's the thing I keep coming back to. If keeping Jalen Hurts is the goal, and I think for Alabama it wants the best backup quarterback it possibly can, some sort of two-quarterback system where these guys are essentially just sort of splitting reps because Alabama's blowing all these teams out. It doesn't matter who plays quarterback. You play Mac Jones, you can play, Mac the Ninth, you can play anybody you want to. It doesn't matter who your quarterback is. You're going to be winning games anyway. So why not promise Jalen Hurts some reps to keep him on campus? The tricky thing there is, does then it get the Tungo Vailoa family all riled up, and now you lose 2 quarterbacks because 2 is jetting, and tell you Tungo Vailoa is going to Tennessee or wherever.
And it's so weird too, and I don't want to get off topic, but I was doing a radio interview today, and it was about Alabama's quarterback situation, and there's so many different angles. Like Jay Barker's son's on the team as a quarterback. Bear Bryant's great grandson is headed in as a quarterback. It's like, well, this turned into a political debate almost. So who's going to be the starting quarterback there? And I guarantee you, they're all good and could be successful.
Cliff Nelson says if you got Hurts sitting the first part of the season, you're going to lose him by game 6. I don't know if he means mentally checking out or actually physically leaving the university.
Either way.
That may be the case, and they'd both probably be, I guess, equally as bad. We'll certainly plenty talk more about this coming up later on. For now, though, item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. As I said before, SEC Media Days in Atlanta today, and as we're doing this show live here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we're still awaiting LSU coach Ed Orgeron taking his place. Yep. With reporters at the podium and having a press conference. But I can't help but think about how Orgeron's press conference here in Atlanta in 2018 is very, very similar to the one that he had in Hoover, Alabama in 2017, at least in one respect. Once again, forced to talk a lot about quarterbacks. Now, last year, I wanted to go back and look at what Ed Orgeron had to say about quarterbacks then to decide how different this answer is going to sound now. Here is Orgeron talking about quarterbacks from 2017. For LSU, that topic never seems to go out of style. Let's go back in time a year as a potential foreshadowing to today.
There's still a quarterback competition going into fall camp, but right now, if we were to play, Danny would be our starter. And by the way, Danny loves the competition. He loves that we made it a quarterback competition. Actually, he thrives in it.
So that's him last year touting Danny Etling, who eventually did become the LSU quarterback. Miles Brennan played some in the early going last year, but it really was Danny Etling's team. You were always higher on Etling than I was. But clearly that's a competition with a lean and a nod towards Danny Etling. When Orgeron speaks today, it's a little bit different scenario. We all assume that Joe Burrow, the Ohio State transfer, is going to eventually emerge as the LSU starter. Otherwise, why would you bring him on campus? You already had 3 quarterbacks. Right. Why do you need a 4th unless you plan on starting the one that you're bringing in? Do you think that he shows any deference to Joe Burrow, or does he try to treat him as one of the 4, no different than any of the others?
No, I feel like that, this is Joe Burrow's show, right? I mean, and obviously Ed Orgeron has a lot going on. And he's going to have to answer a ton of critics this year about Steve Ensminger and a lot of other deals, but I think he has to own this, right? I mean, if you're Ed Orgeron, you have to own this. You have to say, listen, there's a reason we brought this in. Make it a celebration. Make it a big recruiting win. Make it a, boy, we beat out all these other schools for Joe Burrow. Man, we were really lucky to get this guy on campus. It makes our quarterback room better. If I'm Ed Orgeron, I'm going out there and owning it. And I'm saying, you know what? This is what it is. We made our entire football team better by bringing this guy in, and this guy's going to get every shot.
I love your idea of treat it as a recruiting win because Orgeron needs those.
Yeah.
I think that Joe Burrow was one, so touting it as such, to me, only makes sense. I guess there is the element of, though, let's be fair to this young man who has gone from one pressure cooker now to another. And, the Ohio State fan base may be somewhat bigger than LSU's, but I don't know that it's more passionate than LSU fan base. So I do think you've got to be careful about what praise you sort of heap onto him because that's going to have a way of sticking to him like, some of that gumbo sticks to your ribs. That's sort of corny. Cheesy. I don't know.
That's
honestly, if I could go back,
definitely a Monday here.
If I could go back and push the delete key, like that, all the analogies can't be winners. They can't all work. Yeah. But nonetheless, the point is, if you praise him too much, it ends up setting up an unfair situation where it's sort of hard to live up to that. So I love the idea of touting his recruiting win. At the same time, you want to be careful attaching too high of an expectation to him. You want to under-promise and over-deliver here if you're Ed Orgeron about to unveil Joe Burrow to the world.
Yeah, no, and I think the other half of that is you definitely want to keep the other quarterbacks interested. You don't want a mass exodus like they dealt with at Texas A&M a couple of years ago, where the other quarterbacks go, well, you know what, my time's done. I'm kind of out of here. It goes back to what I was telling you the story about how Nick Saban doesn't pick captains until after the year. It's because he doesn't want other people to wash their hands of the situation. He wants to make sure everybody is still locked in. So I think that's the line you have to toe if you're Ed Orgeron. We've mentioned a couple times in the show, Ed Orgeron needs the positive PR right now. He needs to go in the right direction. He needs people to start rooting for something that he's doing. And if he has to own a quarterback in order to get that done, I don't see the downside.
Yeah, I think the problem for this is, and this is just practically speaking, Orgeron's already told us they had a quarterback once.
That's true.
And that was before he went out and got this one.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
at some point in time, it's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like if he was like, I told you I was going to find our quarterback, and we had to go to Columbus, Ohio to get him. It sort of feels like that the story kind of keeps changing there in that respect.
Yeah, not only did he say they had a quarterback, he said our quarterback is in this room.
In that room, that's
quarterback
right. Yeah.
we've been waiting
that's
on.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And it would, listen, there's a ton of different ways to take it. It just, to me, it's the legend that is Ed Orgeron. He's going to say those things. He is the salesman at the head of this program right now. So I don't think it's that out of character if he comes on and says, Joe Burrow's our guy. I don't think he's going to say that, but I'm just kind of offering up a solution to what I'd do if I were him.
Steve Weaver corrects me. He says, B.A. gumbo actually sticks to your belly, not your ribs. That's sort of my failed analogy from a little bit earlier. I do love gumbo, though. You?
Nah, yeah, I haven't had gumbo in a long time.
I love
It's
a
not
good
one of those
gumbo.
things I get into very often, but
I'm a big warm soup guy. I like hearty, warm soups.
right.
And I sort of put gumbo in that category, like a stew type of thing.
I haven't had gumbo in years.
Oh, I don't know. You put a little sausage in there. I love that. A little sausage, a little shrimp. I love that. Cliff Nelson says, and this is also brought up by somebody else in the comment section. G. Grace says, if Joe Burrow starts, the other two quarterbacks will transfer, or other quarterbacks will transfer. Cliff Nelson says at least two of them will probably transfer. And at this point in time, what do you care? I mean, you've given Lowell Narcisse his chance. You've given Justin McMillan his chance. You've given Miles Brennan his chance. Speaking of Miles Brennan, his family famous for doing gumbo there at Dickie Brennan's restaurant. But nonetheless, you've given these guys a chance. None of them are distinguishing themselves, so what do you care if they transfer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough, and the question is which ones transfer. First of all, I think it's McMillan, and definitely Brennan's probably getting out of there too. So it develops into a sticky situation because what if you do get into fall camp? By the way, Joe Burrow wasn't with you in spring, so what if they transfer now and you do get into fall camp and Joe Burrow's not what you thought he was, and all of a sudden you're trying to turn back the clock and say, boy, all of a sudden we don't have any quarterbacks on the roster. So it's definitely tough, man. I don't envy Ed Orgeron at all for what he's going to be facing the next couple of weeks.
All right, item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Today is one of those rites of passage. Every single year you've got the SEC commissioner. For a long time, it was the late, great Mike Slive who always delivered sort of the state of the SEC address when it comes to SEC Media Days. And now the honor belongs to the new commissioner, Greg Sankey. And this is sort of I'm going to misuse this phrase, probably sort of a pro forma thing usually. It's essentially a PR release read by the commissioner and it ends up getting aired on TV. There's not a whole lot to come from that. I think for this year, though, Mike, this commissioner in particular with Greg Sankey, I think he's got some tough questions at some point in time he's got to find a way to answer. I know that gambling was a big topic that came up today. What's the future of that going to be, and how much is the SEC going to embrace this? It's fair to ask. But for me, it's about more than just that for Greg Sankey.
Yeah.
I mentioned this on Dog Nation Daily this morning. That's the show that I do every single day. We've had a few issues lately where SEC figures have kind of done battle with each other publicly. The commissioner really did nothing to step in. If you want to go back as far as 2016, it was Georgia versus Alabama, maybe even Smart versus Saban in particular over the Maurice Smith transfer. You had the same thing kind of emerge again this year with Brandon Kennedy, where it's Nick Saban trying to, you'll say it differently, but I'll say hide behind the SEC to prevent Kennedy from ending up at either Tennessee or Auburn. Ultimately, he lands at Tennessee, and Jeremy Pruitt did his part to sort of wrest him away there. You had the Joe Oliva versus Florida issue about the game cancellation a couple seasons ago, and as recently as a few months ago, you had the Missouri athletic director accuse the South Carolina women's basketball coach Dawn Staley of creating a dangerous and violent atmosphere for one of their basketball games. This ends up getting dragged to court, and the Missouri ADs essentially sort of backtracked on the whole thing there. Where was the commissioner on any of this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Doesn't the commissioner have to step up and become a little stronger figure on the SEC? I would suggest that right now Greg Sankey is not a strong enough SEC commissioner.
Yeah, he's just kind of been taking a back seat.
Yeah.
And honestly, listen, I can go a million different directions on this, and I'll go into the gambling aspect of this as well. Coming out and saying, boy, at some point in the future we're going to have injury reports, or they're going to call them availability reports.
Yeah.
This whole thing that's coming out and saying this makes it easier on players, to me, is an absolute joke. One of the things they've been putting out, and I think Stuart Mandel wrote a column about this, boy, that way, the players don't have to step in front of the media and have to be slimy about whether or not they're feeling good or not, or they don't have to lie to the media about, they don't have to dance around questions about whether or not they can play that week. It's an absolute load of crap to me. The players, more than anybody, don't want anybody to know who they're healthy. You think if you're a DB with a bad knee that you want an injury report out there saying, boy, my knee's not feeling good this week? It just blows my mind, the spin that a guy like Greg Sankey is putting on all this gambling stuff, saying, boy, this is just good for everybody to put the injury report out. This is going to be – it's not. It's hogwash.
Well, the flip side of this, too, is like if you look at the way the NFL injury report gets abused, and whether you gamble or not, you would agree that it's not one of those deals of finding out who has actually hurt. It's you put people who aren't hurt on there too. Tom Brady's been listed as questionable for the Patriots like every game for like 5 years in a row. I mean that's the way that you sort of cloud the issue here. We're not going to get any more credible information about who's hurt and who's not. We'll simply have the people that are hurt mixed in there with a whole bunch of people who aren't hurt.
Right.
That's the way the NFL injury report gets abused. Yeah. And I know this started with Gene Smith, the athletic director at Ohio State. I guess it continues a bit with Greg Sankey here today. I mean, all of this is just a way of saying, hey, maybe we can make a few dollars off this gambling stuff too.
No doubt.
Which, listen, is fine. I don't really have a problem with that. But let's not pretend this is anything other than that.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Like, it chuckles when Greg Sankey gets up in front of everybody today and says, boy, you know, at some point we're going to have an availability report. I think it's a good thing for everybody. No, we're looking out after the pockets right now. The SEC and the NCAA and everybody else is going on. That has nothing to do with the players. It doesn't have anything to do with the players having a dance around thing or the coach making it uniform to where everybody. No, this is all about, padding the pockets right now. And I'm a gambler. I don't blame him, but you're right with me where Greg Sankey's just kind of on edge with me right now.
In the comment section, Jeremy Pettis says the idea of scheduling came up today. And that is one of those things I do think that Greg Sankey's got to be pushed on a little bit more as well. How are we going to alter this SEC schedule going forward? Are we going to move to something I know that's very important to you, which is the idea of a 9-game conference?
Yeah, I mean, Greg Sankey went in front of cameras today and he said, listen, the 6-1-1 model is obviously the favorite from all the SEC teams. Like, who's pushing this? I asked this question a couple of weeks ago. Is it the Vanderbilts, Kentuckys, and other teams that are trying to stay bowl eligible? Is that really what you want out of the league, to say, boy, we got to make sure these lower tier teams are bowl eligible? I feel like they've got to do a better job answering.
Well, you know this though. I mean, and listen, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, they're no different when it comes to this. They may know that practically speaking they need to play a tough schedule, but if you gave a football coach his choice,
right,
they're not playing a tough schedule.
No doubt.
They don't want a 9th SEC game. They want to play, Austin Peay for a second time. You know what I'm saying? They want to play UMass as much as they possibly can. Now, publicly, Saban's going to say the right things. Kirby Smart's going to say the right things because practically speaking, it does help you now to play a tougher schedule. But back in the days when you had, the BCS and a lot of other things, these coaches were cherry picking as easy a schedule they could possibly have, and they were avoiding as many of these, extra games, SEC East against SEC West. There are plenty of coaches who say, I like our schedule just fine.
Yeah, it's funny. It's going to have to be it's like they're trying to feel it out. Like, who's going to take the first leap? It's like if everybody's willing to do it, yeah, we'll go there and do it. Yeah, we'll play a 9-game conference schedule, but I'm not going to be the first one to man up and step in front of that and say, I'm going to be the first one to do it without everybody else. It's like they're waiting on the entire league to get back.
All right, item number 4 here in our SEC Country Live First in 10 list. Georgia gets some good news over the weekend as it adds a former 5-star wide receiver coming out of high school from Savannah for the class of 2016, the nation's only 5-star receiver for the 2016 recruiting cycle. Demetrius Robertson, though, went to Cal, became a freshman All-American in his one full season there in Berkeley. After being injured in 2017, made the announcement a few months ago that he planned to transfer, and over the weekend, via video, which we'll show you right here, Demetrius Robertson announces he's on his way to UGA. In fact, teaming up with Chiming In Media, here's exactly what it looked like from D-Rob when he made the Georgia announcement. You see him showing off the athleticism and the physical specs that have made him such a coveted prospect a couple of times now, both in 2016 and here in 2018, and with the Savannah River in the background, the River Walk in the foreground, via Chiming In Media saying he's heading to UGA. This was one of the big misses for Kirby Smart in 2016. Is this a chance for a do-over for both these guys here now?
I think it definitely is. And listen, I know he's applying for the hardship waiver because he's moving back close to home, and I don't know if you have any insight on that, but if that were to come to fruition and he's able to play this year, this is a huge deal. Like, I kind of put it on the back burner for right now and I'd say, boy, you know what? That could be really great. If next year Jake Fromm's a starter and he's a junior and that wide receiver core is starting to straighten up, should have a really good offensive line, should still have some really good backs. That could be an incredible offense. But if it's this year, this is a huge story. I mean, this is nothing less than a huge story if he's able to kind of pull it out this year. We can bar the football team. I mean, this is a game-changing body at wide receiver, and he could be nothing short of spectacular if he's allowed to play.
I've operated on the assumption this entire time that he would likely not play until 2019, but maybe my assumption on this is wrong given the current climate around the NCAA, given the nature of his hardship, the fact that he's already sat out for most of the 2017 season. In fact, a guy who knows this story really well is my colleague Dog Nation's own Jeff Sintel, who when he joined me for a special this past weekend when Robertson made his announcement said, you know what, don't be so quick to assume that Robertson won't win this appeal and become immediately eligible for 2018. In fact, here's how Dog Nation's Jeff Sintel explained it.
I think it's still very much up in the air. I think that maybe the transfer appeal, you got to look at a couple of things. Number one, means he just sat out all of 2017 season. He received a medical red shirt, and he, by the letter of the NCAA law, has 3 more remaining seasons of eligibility after a brilliant freshman year at Cal, where he caught a team-high 7 touchdowns. But since he sat out all of 2017 for a medical issue and received a medical red shirt, he's also applied for his transfer due to a hardship case. That's to be closer to his family for very personal reasons. The one thing you'll look at here is that would involve Robertson sitting out 2 consecutive seasons. So that will receive a very interesting ruling by the NCAA. I think it helps that he's transferring to stay very close to home. He has family in the Savannah area, and also his mother is in the Atlanta area as well.
So that's very interesting that the hardship, given some family issues here, the fact that he's coming back to his home state in Georgia, might make the NCAA, even though I guess the letter of the rule would suggest that he's supposed to be ineligible, maybe there's, I don't know, a new mood, new climate around the NCAA that makes him eligible. I'm going to say this, and y'all know that I'm a fan, so I guess you can, take this for what it's worth. I think this changes the calculus for Georgia greatly if they had a 5-star receiver. This was a freshman All-American.
Yeah.
This guy had nearly 800 yards receiving in his 1 full year there at Cal. I think he would immediately become Georgia's best receiver. I'm assuming that he's fully healthy. And Georgia's already got a couple pretty pretty interesting guys in that position, even if they're not quite as polished as what I think that Robertson brings to the table. I think this makes Georgia a better team. What I already think is probably a pretty good team in Georgia, if you add a 5-star receiver who's maybe motivated for a year at UGA to move on to the NFL, how could that not send the Georgia offensive productivity through the roof?
I think it will, and it adds some range back to your wide receiver core. And and I mentioned this too in the YouTube comment section. I think this is a situation that Trevon Grimes down at Florida, the Ohio State transfer, they're probably keeping a close eye on each other in terms of this hardship waiver or whether or not either one of them can get eligible. But I think they're both incredible playmakers. If they are able to pull it off and become healthy this year, I think both of these guys, really, you want to keep an eye on what they're able to do.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I also believe that if somehow Demetrius Robertson does become eligible in 2019, for Georgia it's still a massive get, assuming that he would actually hang around and play that 2019 season as opposed to giving NFL a shot after just basically biding his time until he's eligible for the draft there. It'd be potentially adding him to a pair of other 5-star receivers, Jaden Hazelwood, Dominic Blaylock, both current UGA commits. It's a big deal for me in 2019, but man, for 2018, for Georgia fans looking to say, how do you even things up with Alabama? Well, you saw in the national championship game, Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, and Henry Ruggs, that trio of what was freshmen a year ago, that trio of Alabama wide receivers is very, very good. You put Demetrius Robertson in the mix for Georgia here, it does start to look a little bit more like that depth that Alabama's been able to build there.
Yeah, no, and I think there's an interesting kind of argument going on in the YouTube comment section too. MJD brings up the fact that he thinks Terry Godwin's better than D-Rob. I don't know that to be true, and I think that when you look at the body type and the speed to be able to take off the top of the defense, I think it adds actually a different element. To me, it's not upgrading a position. I think it's adding a different element to the offense. I really do.
Yeah, I think that Terry Godwin is a very good player. I don't know that he is the deep threat as a receiver that Demetrius Robertson was able to be. That's one of the things that Pro Football Focus has done some good number crunching on, that Robertson was really catching those long, deep balls in the Pac-12. Now, you're going to say it's easier defense, it's sort of softer secondaries. That may very all well be true. And I think that Terry Godwin's going to play in the NFL one day probably, but I don't know that he's a better receiver than Demetrius Robertson.
Yeah, I don't either. And to me, it's the ranginess. And this comes from winning the 50-50 balls. And I brought this up, too. I was talking earlier to somebody about Jerry Jeudy over at Alabama. When you have the guy that can go over the top, and it reminds me of like Mike Williams at Clemson, when you have those guys that can win 50-50 balls, your offense looks a lot better. It's hard to even put it in perspective, but Texas A&M's had a few guys like that over the years that can really go up, get over the top of somebody, bring the ball back. That's what he brings.
Item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live, first and 10 list. One of the coaches that did meet with the media here today at SEC Media Days for the very first time was Texas A&M coach Jimbo Fisher. And Fisher said something really interesting. And, Mike, I want you to hear this in just a moment because I think he said something that not all of the sort of colleagues that are also first-year coaches have the freedom to say. And I want you to hear that. You can weigh in on that. But before we get to that, I know we have a lot of folks that cheer for Texas A&M and watch our show every single day. I don't mean this is a jab. I don't mean this is any kind of snarky way. But I don't know that A&M yet has felt like fully into the SEC yet. They've always sort of felt still to me like a Big 12 team, massive fan base, rabid following, much like all the SEC teams have, but not yet a full-fledged member of the SEC, despite the fact they had Manziel and they upset Alabama in that memorable game in 2012. They haven't really quite felt that way to me yet. But seeing Jimbo Fisher walk around the halls of Atlanta today at SEC Media Days, this SEC-style coach, a guy that was bred in the SEC as an offensive coordinator, it makes, to me, A&M, even before he's coached his first game, it makes A&M to me feel much more like a full-fledged member of this conference. I think of Texas as the Southwest. I think of the SEC as the Southeast. But Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M makes them feel more like a full-fledged member of this conference.
Yeah, no, and Bo Molinari brings up the fact that it's his birthday in the comment section. He says, happy birthday to me. And Jimbo, we're getting to talk about Jimbo Fisher for topic number 5, so happy birthday to Bo Molinari. But I agree with you. To me, and it's hard to kind of go down this route, but Jimbo Fisher does, to me, scream SEC. And it's hard to say that because we saw him at ACC Media Days a year ago saying, boy, the ACC is the best.
He's kind of an SEC hater.
He's an SEC coach. So
that's what an SEC coach would say if he was coaching the ACC.
Such a good point. That is such a good point. I mean, that's why I feel like he's such an SEC guy. But
an SEC
Jimbo
coach
just looks like an SEC
says
coach.
what he needs to at the time.
Sounds like an SEC coach, looks like an SEC coach, knows the SEC. I mean, he just seems like an SEC
So
coach.
with that in mind, Jimbo said something really interesting today. You know, the timeline for success. This is the kind of thing that some coaches in their first year in a new job sort of sidestep. Jimbo Fisher took it head on. You think the expectations for Fisher are big already? Wait till you hear some of the things that Fisher has to say. My guess is those expectations only start to grow from here. Here's some of Jimbo Fisher talking about that. Take a listen.
Now, you want to win immediately, and that's your place. But is that realistic? I don't know. It's all about the process of putting things in place because you want to build the program the right way up and get kids to understand and buy in. But I'll say this, our attitude of our players has been tremendous. I've been very proud of that. I mean, they've come in, there's a lot of change. We do things differently. Not that the other side was right, just a philosophical difference, and the way they've handled it has been tremendous. So, you know, you don't ever know. We went to Auburn that year in 1993, and Alabama was defending national champs in 92, and they come off a 5-6 team. We went undefeated. So it can happen quickly. At LSU, it took 3 or 4 years. At Florida State, it took us, I think, 4 years to do it. I don't know. It could be. You don't ever put a timetable on things because you can't judge people. You don't know how each guy's going to respond and what's going to happen in the chemistry unit, the camaraderie unit, and your coaching staff. So hopefully we're going to do it as quickly as we possibly can.
So I think that's really interesting for Jimbo Fisher. Now, virtually every coach says, oh, you can't put a timetable on this kind of stuff.
Right.
But most of the time when they say that, what they mean is, y'all don't expect me to do too much too quickly. Jimbo Fisher seems to be saying, this may happen faster than y'all realize, which is a really bold thing for a guy to go say at SEC Media Days. Yeah. I find that comment to actually be pretty interesting.
I found it to come off as confident. And it's almost like you don't ever hear first-year coaches being confident. Like, put that next to what we've been hearing out of Jeremy Pruitt where, hey, you know, we've got to get some things. Like, he sounded confident, and I got to give the guy some credit because I think he should be confident. I've said it a million times. I love what we were seeing out of Texas A&M throughout the spring. Every storyline that came out, every piece of film I watched, it looked like they were hitting the next level. It looked like he was getting more out of his players, and I really look for whoever's the quarterback. I think it's going to be Nick Starkel. Kind of take that lump, and it feels like Jimbo, I don't want to say he's feeling himself, but he definitely thinks they have some players in the room from his comments there.
Yeah, you mentioned Jeremy Pruitt. I would say that Jeremy Pruitt couldn't say this. He'll have his turn with the media, and he'll be talking about the same kind of timetable for success stuff. I'm sure that's a big topic for him as well. But people would look at him like he was crazy if he talked as boldly and as brash as the way that Jimbo Fisher says. That would come across as just complete and total false bravado. It wouldn't make any sense in the world. But Jimbo Fisher's won a national championship. Jimbo Fisher stood next to Nick Saban when Saban won a national championship at LSU back in 2003. He was a part of an Auburn staff in 1993 that, best team on the radio, so to speak. NCAA probations prevented it from playing on football. But they did go undefeated that year. This is a guy that's got some credentials here. If he says it, you sort of are forced to say, well, maybe Jimbo Fisher knows what he's talking about because the track record sort of follows him into the room here. I don't know that I would quite say it the way that he is because I think he's got enough issues with, A&M fans are already giving national championship, plaques as it already. But the fact that he says it, man, it feels like Texas A&M. This is, everything's bigger in Texas, including the talk apparently. This fits in Aggie land really, really well.
Yeah, and you brought it up that Jimbo has seen it, right? He's seen it firsthand. And what's interesting about that too is, Jeremy Pruitt's seen it. He just hasn't done it as a head coach. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt knows what a national championship caliber team looks like. He knows if he's got the players that head in that direction. It just, to me, it's like a Jimbo stepping in front of it saying, you know what, we're not going to back down from this. It's almost like he's making the statement of, hey, listen, $75 million guaranteed. I have full confidence in myself that we can get there. And he's not proclaiming, hey, listen, we're going to make a run at the SEC West this year, but he's not backing off of it saying, boy, it's going to take us some time either.
All right, let me hit two really interesting comments here. First of all, John Haigton, and John, I hope I didn't mispronounce your name in the Facebook comment section. I apologize if I did. He says, I think A&M maybe wins a few more than predicted. 9-3 maybe for Texas A&M, he says. I guess my only issue would be, let's say that A&M does go 9-3, which is probably better of a record than I think they do in year one under Jimbo Fisher. The fact that he says, hey, this maybe happens, we may start winning games sooner than you think, we're going to try to start winning as quickly as possible. Does that kind of suggestion make 9-3 not feel as good as it should? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because when I hear what Jimbo Fisher said there, maybe I'm reading too much into it, it sounds like he's talking about something better than 9-3. But 9-3 would be a really good season. You hope that he's not sort of setting up a level of expectation that makes it difficult to appreciate what, for me, 9 regular season wins, that's overachieving from what I sort of see happening in College Station.
It almost sets up a scenario for me, and you Texas A&M fans can let me know if I'm way off base here, but it sets up a scenario for me to where it's possible that in year one, Texas A&M fans are happier about the outcome of the year than Jimbo Fisher is. You know what I mean? Like, it's usually the head coach that's saying, boy, we did this, we did that, we did the best what we had. It's almost setting up a scenario where Jimbo Fisher might not be happy with 9 wins, but it's like the rest of, the Aggie fan base is saying, boy, we finally beat LSU this year, or, we made a run in Clemson when they were in College Station, or we were on the road at Auburn and were able to beat that football team. It sets up a scenario to me to where if they can knock off some of those teams, A&M fans are going to be really happy.
Jason Hoffner in our Facebook comment section says, Jimbo's overconfident, making it rough on himself to meet expectations. I also think that Jason has an interesting point here as well in that, listen, you've heard one-hit wonders before, right?
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of people that have written some great songs and they just couldn't follow it up. There are a lot of people that had, great movies, great novels, great, all kinds of success in entertainment, and matching that success with your next project is not often easy to do. There are plenty of, sports examples of that as well. Jimbo Fisher won a national championship at Florida State. But that doesn't guarantee you a blueprint that you can travel. What is it that Hemingway talked about, a movable feast?
Right.
National championships aren't necessarily movable feasts. You can't necessarily take them with you wherever you go.
Yeah, and it's attention to detail, and there's so many boxes you got to check off down the list. You got to be willing to go there when you're one of these coaches. You have to have the track record that you've proven that you're willing to work that hard, and you've proven that you were willing to make your football team work that hard. Not only work that hard, but make sure they're doing the right things. It's a long process, but Jimbo Fisher, to me, having known that process and having seen it and having done it, he gets a leg up for me, and I give him a pass on this.
So the final point for me on this is there are a lot of programs in the SEC with new coaches, whether they be first-time ever coaches or just first-year coaches at the new school, where I believe they're trying to manufacture excitement. They're trying to dig deep and find it. They're trying to sell it. They're trying to package it. They're trying to sort of create it. At Texas A&M, it just feels authentic. Now that doesn't mean 5 years from now Fisher works out better than Mullen or better than Pruitt or better than Chad Morris, better than all these guys. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed to work out better, but when you look at it right now, it's just more authentic in College Station than it is in these other schools.
Yeah, I'm cracking up right now because all I can see is Chad Morris rappelling in from the roof,
right,
doing the little switcheroo, and it's like, okay, I see what we're trying to do here. Yeah. We're trying to make sure we get a ton of people looking at the program. But you're right, Jimbo Fisher hasn't had to do that. It's Jimbo Fisher. I make $7.5 million a year. I have $75 million guaranteed, and I'm going to coach this football team.
Item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and I mentioned Florida briefly in the topic there on Jimbo Fisher. One of the players who's going to really be tasked getting Florida kind of back to where Gators fans hope it can be, or at least setting the framework for that to happen more in the future, is a guy heading into his last year at Florida, the one-time Uber prospect, Martez Ivey, who started his Florida career at guard, has moved over here to left tackle, and this year in 2018 is expected to, if you're a Gators fan, hopefully be the anchor for that offensive line. Could have gone to the NFL maybe after the 2017 season, chose to stick around for Florida, and he recently told 24/7 Sports exactly why it was that he wanted to come back to Gainesville for a little more football in the orange and blue before giving the NFL a try. If you're a Florida fan, I think you're going to really like this. It comes from Ivey, and I'll show it to you on the screen here, and we'll read it here together. He says, I don't like to go out the easy way. I just felt like 4-7 is the easy way. I know I had a shot to go play in the league and see where I got drafted. I also know the legacy I want to leave behind, and it wasn't that. I really respect Martez Ivey's words here, and I know he's thinking about the NFL, but I also know that he remembers kind of coming in as a part of the beginning stages of the Jim McElwain era of Florida, and he was supposed to be one of the guys that helped resurrect that program in the absence of Will Muschamp, and for For Ivey, it works out okay. He is a starter. For McElwain, it works out terrible. He's gone. And yet here we are now in the Martez Ivey career with him once again being a part of the build-up for a brand new coach. And I can imagine that Martez Ivey, knowing the uniform that he wears and the history and the heritage that Florida's had, he doesn't want 4 and 7 to be a big part of the way that he's remembered there in the Florida uniform. Y'all know I don't like Florida, but I respect Martez Ivey for what he says here.
Yeah, no, and listen, let's be honest too. If Martez Ivey had gotten a first-round grade back, he'd probably have gone, right?
That's
I mean, he's headed to the NFL,
true.
and so I do respect what he's saying though, and I think the reason I respect it is because I look and see what Martez Ivey could possibly be. Martez Ivey could be a first-round draft pick left tackle. He's got to be able to, put his mind to it. He's got to work out the details. He's got to become a little bit better conditioned on down the line. But if he's able to do that in a Dan Mullen offense, then I think the sky's the limit. And this guy's saying that, hey, listen, wasn't proud of what we've done last year. I think the first step is admitting it, and it sounds like Martez Ivey saying, listen, we just didn't get it done across the front last year, and let's get some things changed up.
For shows like this where, one of us is like oftentimes all the way one way and somebody else sort of all the way the other.
Right.
Martez Ivey is not necessarily the best topic here because the truth is somewhere in the middle. He was a 5-star player coming into high school. He hasn't performed like that in a Florida uniform, but he's no bust. I mean, if you're a dependable starter along the offensive line in the SEC, you're a pretty good player, and Ivey is clearly a dependable starter, and now it's time for him to be more than that for Dan Mullen in his first season. But here's the thing, and this is where, once again, I'm not a Florida fan, I'm not an Ivey fan, but I do find myself at least wanting to come to his defense on this a little bit. He didn't show up as a high school senior and say, hey, y'all, look how good I am.
Right.
It was the 24/7 Sports and the Rivals and the ESPN 300s. It was those ranking services that told him how good he was, and the rest of us just sort of bought into it. I mean, Ivey wasn't making these self-proclamations. He was proclaiming that by the other services. So maybe the misevaluation happened coming out of high school, but Ivey's clearly been a player that Florida's better off having than not having, and you know what? It sounds like his level of motivation is where it needs to be here for the final year of his career.
Yeah, no, and listen, to backtrack a little bit too, this is a guy who was coached under Jim McElwain, and I just told you a minute ago, it's like Jimbo Fisher knows how to get it there, so does Jeremy Pruitt, but you still have to check off the list as you go. You still have to be willing to put the work in. You still have to follow up on the details. Jim McElwain didn't follow up on the details with this offensive line. He didn't follow up on the details with Martez Ivey. And while Martez Ivey was just as hype as or maybe not just as hype, but he kind of follows along that same path as Trey Smith at Tennessee, just hasn't been able to show up in the same way that Trey Smith's at. And so I do like that he's embracing it, because usually, you can sit in the back room and say, boy, you know what, I'm the best player on the team. I'm doing all these things. It sounds to me like he's saying, I'm not comfortable with leaving this way.
Jeff Crawford, a really strong statement in the Facebook comment section, and he says, it may take Mullen some time, but you can safely bet you'll never see another Gator coach leaving the field in Jacksonville with a smile on his face after taking a beatdown. He means from Georgia. Things have changed. You may remember that from the end of the Georgia-Florida game last year. McElwain, maybe knowing what his fate was about to be, was caught on camera jogging off the field, and he did have a big smile on his face, yellow teeth and all. He did have a big smile on his face.
I can talk about my guy like that, man. You're not going to talk about my guy like that, man.
He did have a big smile on his face, and Jeff Crawford says, as a Florida fan, that wasn't something he enjoyed seeing, and that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of Florida fans agree with.
There was a disconnect there. I mean, there was a disconnect there. And Florida fans will talk about it all you want to. And I raised the question a couple of times last year. Can a guy from Eastern Washington come down to Florida and be a successful coach? And it never meshed. And I love Jim McElwain. I've said it a million times. It never meshed. It never felt like he was really a truly Florida Gator.
On all this topic, how about Shannon Burgess, who's a very good LSU fan, who brings up a really interesting line. He says, I have never, ever been looking more forward to a Florida-Tennessee game in my entire life than I am this season. And Shannon's not cheering for the Gators or the Vols in that game, but I think a lot of us feel very similar to Shannon on that.
I think I agree with you on that. And it's one of those things where you guys know, I mean, you watch your team on Saturdays, you pay attention to what your team's doing, you follow along with your team's storylines. I think it's been one of the best things about this show is that you can feel that momentum building. It's like, who is it going to be, Jeremy Pruitt or Dan Mullen? Defensive coach, offensive coach, really locking horns what could be a lot of years to come. Who's going to get that first step is going to be a big piece of it.
All right, item number 7 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And admittedly, this may be a bit of a reach here because watch lists are not necessarily the most prestigious thing to be on. There are a lot of them that come out this time of year. But I did notice that Auburn had a couple guys on the Bednarik watch list for the Defensive Player of the Year. Javaris Davis is on there, and the defensive lineman Dontavius Russell's on there as well. Now, there are plenty of schools that have multiple players on the Bednarik watch list, and every player in college football is eligible to win the award, whether you're on the watch list or not. but it's just a slight comparison here. Georgia, who's the reigning SEC champion, had a pretty good defensive year ago. They've only got one player on the Bednarik watch list right now. That's the cornerback DeAndre Baker. Alabama's got multiple, LSU's got multiple, but Auburn does too. We talk mostly about the Auburn offense when we talk about Auburn in the show. Is Gus Malzahn going to let Chip Lindsey have control? Jarrett Stidham going to put together a Heisman campaign? Are they going to find some running backs? We sort of talk about that stuff all the time. But this is a team that's really led by its defense this season, right? And it's a team that has a chance to be truly elite at that defensive level, competing with the LSUs, the Alabamas as the top defense in the entire league.
Yeah, no, and listen, another one of those Davises from Auburn. We talked about it a couple times. They print those Davises off, and they're always great players, and it always blows my mind that you're able to come up with them. But I think this is interesting for a couple of different reasons. First of all, this is exactly what you need when you talk about having somebody that's locked down on the edge, somebody that can lock it, man up with a lot of the wide receivers from around the league, and also have somebody that can rush the passer. That's almost your two tough positions to find on defense. And so if you have those guys and they're at an elite level, that's big. It also kind of blows my mind that the other names that you could possibly have pointed to on this Auburn front seven that could have been included on this list.
I'm thinking the same thing.
There's a number of them that could have been included on this list, and it seems like they just rotate in bodies that look exactly the same and have the same output. And I think for that reason, that becomes a scary, scary deal for a lot of teams.
I'm not so sure that Derek Brown and Marcavius Big Cat Bryant aren't potentially the two best players on the Auburn defense, and they're not the ones that get the watch list consideration, which shows you this Kevin Steele group. And I say this every time this subject comes up, I'm going to keep saying it. I thought that Kevin Steele was a bad hire in his make, because Kevin Steele had been a bad defensive coordinator in more than one place.
Yeah.
It didn't work for Will Muschamp at Auburn for whatever reason, and Kevin Steele steps in as a replacement, and he is just better and flourishing. That's a great word. Flourishing from the word go. It is really funny how these coordinators can just seem completely different from one job to the next. Whatever Kevin Steele's doing here at Auburn, it's not what it has been in some of these other styles.
Yeah, you always hear the statement, it's not about the X's and the O's, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes.
Yes, it is,
that's been the story of Kevin Steele's run.
But what's weird is, I don't want to get, relitigate this whole thing, but it's not like Steele's had untalented defense in the past. No. It's just sort of I'm not even sure this Auburn team would rank as the most talent that he's had. It may, but it may not. The point is, it's just better results overall. No,
I agree. And to me, this sets up Auburn in a few different ways. First of all, the onus really does, in my opinion, I think there's more pressure than there even was last year on Jarrett Stidham this year. Right?
Yeah.
We talked about Jarrett Stidham a ton last year at Media Days. Around Media Days, Jarrett Stidham this, Jarrett Stidham. What's the transfer like over from the from the Big 12 and the SEC? What can he do? He's one of the Heisman frontrunners. He's like 10-to-1 odds. We talked about him a ton. I think there's more pressure on him this year because Jarrett Stidham's going to be the focal point. There's no Kerryon Johnson right now. There's no Cam Petway. There's not that big offensive line that, even though they should be good, the defense is going to be there. What can Jarrett Stidham? I think that this team goes as far as he does.
Steve Weaver in the YouTube comment section says when things go bad for Kevin Steele, he goes really, really bad. The good news for Auburn fans, though, is they haven't had too many of those moments during this Steele era here.
Yeah, no, they haven't had a lot. And I think the issues, in the most part, for the last couple of years have been issues offensively. They have had some issues on defense. I'm not going to take that away from them, but they've done their part the last couple of years.
Item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And a rare occurrence happened on this show at the end of last week. I actually got some criticism from a lot of Georgia fans because of something we did not talk about. This happened last week. It sort of went in one ear and out the other for me, but a lot of Georgia fans reached out to me on Twitter, at DogNation Daily, by the way, for those of you who are interested. But a lot of Georgia fans reached out to me on Twitter and said, why aren't you talking about this guy who goes on Feinbaum and predicted South Carolina upset Georgia? This didn't really resonate with me, but it's a former Gamecock player named Tory Gurley. To be honest with you, I'd never heard of Tory Gurley. I don't know if you know Tory Gurley at all. I've never heard of this guy in my entire life. I don't know if he's trying out for an analyst job or what, but he goes from the Feinbaum show, and he said something a lot of Georgia fans don't like. I don't have the audio or anything, but I do have a screen grab here from the Feinbaum show of what Tory Gurley says. He says, there's been a lot of things I see in Georgia where they can be beat in week 2. That's something I'm going to guarantee, that South Carolina gets the win in Williams-Brice. First of all, what are you guaranteeing? Like, what do I get to come to your house and take if you're wrong?
Yeah,
because it ain't a guarantee unless you stand to lose something. So spit the word guarantee out of your mouth. You're not using that word correctly. Right. But I mean, am I going to get fired up and this is coming solely from the perspective of a fan here. If you're a South Carolina fan, I'm sure you think it's a reasonable point. Maybe even a neutral observer thinks it's a reasonable point. That's not really my issue. My issue is I can't get fired up by a guy I've never heard of.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. That's fair. That's not even my issue with it. When I looked into it and I first saw the comments on Twitter last week, my thing was, what is it you're looking at? You know what I'm saying? Like, I see a couple of things where Georgia can be beaten in week 2. What is it? What do you think? Is it Is it the secondary? You think your wide receivers are better in their secondary? You think Jake Bentley's more athletic than the
And by the way, if you think the wide receivers are better than the secondary, you may not be wrong. That's a fairly safe
Exactly.
point. I'm not sure that
question.
alone turns a 15-point spread into a win, but that's something.
That's my question: is what are you hanging your hat on? If you're so confident you're guaranteeing it, but all you're saying is I see some things where they can be beat, I don't think you should guarantee that.
We've been doing this show every day for more than a year. What I'm going to tell you is, I would put more faith and stock in the names that I see show up in this comment section every single day than some guy that I've never heard of, even if that guy once played for South Carolina. And he also, I guess, had some scout team history in the NFL. And I'm not taking a shot at Tory Gurley here. That not my purpose. What I'm saying is I hang out with these people every single day on this comment section. I know what they know about football. If people in that comment section show up and say, I think South Carolina can upset Georgia, then at that point in time, I'm going to lean in and be more curious about why, because this is a group of people that I've grown to believe really knows a lot about football. Tory Gurley, I couldn't pick out of a lineup. I have no idea what he knows about the game. His opinion doesn't really resonate with me, but a lot of Georgia fans did not like hearing, some Carolina guy saying his team was going to upset Georgia. Maybe it's just the time of year. Maybe that happens, but people wanted us to talk about this on the show.
Yeah, no, it's mind-boggling to me too, because that's my thing. It's like, what are you hanging your hat on? What are you seeing? Like, break it down for us. Like, tell me what exactly you're seeing that says you think that Georgia can be beat early in the year. And I'm not saying he's wrong. Obviously, I'm not as high on South Carolina as other people are, and I don't blame the South Carolina player for getting on air and saying, I guarantee a South Carolina win. Yeah. I don't think anything bad comes of that for him. You know what I mean? Like, he's not going to get stomped out by, by South Carolina fans for guaranteeing a win. And obviously, he thinks the football team's going to be, pretty good. One thing I do disagree with, though, is that Jamie Blanton's talking to you. He's saying no one cares about the preseason spreads. That's just a load of crap. Like, a lot of people care about the preseason spreads. When you look at the games and say who has the most difficult schedule, it's because of the spreads right now that we break that down. So I think that's definitely something to point to.
And I use the point spread, the early look-ahead line to South Carolina, as a kind of a context to this conversation overall. And Jamie, I know you're a South Carolina fan, so I don't say this to troll you, but people act like that going to South Carolina for Georgia is some scary thing here of, oh my gosh, you better be careful at South Carolina. Vegas doesn't necessarily think so. Vegas thinks Georgia's about a 15-point favorite in that game. Now, when you play, it may be closer. There's some data out there that shows that Will Muschamp, when he's been more than a double-digit underdog at home, he's covering the spread in those games about half the time. So Muschamp has shown the ability to keep things a little closer than Vegas thinks. But for right now, this whole notion of that South Carolina is some grossly dangerous game for Georgia, according to Vegas, not really. According to Vegas, it's just another road game.
I think the biggest thing in South Carolina's favor is when it is in the schedule. This is not like, you're not who you're going to be by the end of the year. That's one of the things I always say about LSU and Bama or Auburn and Bama is what those teams are by the time they play. They've developed, the passing games come around or the running games come around or the defenses become dominant on either side of the ball. I don't know if Georgia exactly knows what they are in week 2, and if that causes a hiccup, that to me could be the blueprint for an upset.
Shannon Burgess in our YouTube comment section says Orgeron's speaking right now at the SEC Media Days. Y'all tell us what he says. We're obviously not able to watch that right now because of the fact we're doing the show. But if he says something interesting, y'all tell us what he said. And don't lie. We'll know if you're lying.
I don't know if we will. Yeah. I don't know any other coach I'd say we'll know if you're lying. Orgeron could say anything.
But if he says something interesting, tell us and we'll read about it on the show here. Let me do item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I mentioned a moment ago that Georgia got a commitment from a transfer over the weekend. Former 5-star receiver Demetrius Robertson also picked up a commitment from a 3-star defensive lineman from Tennessee for the class in 2019. His name is Zion Logue. This, for me, though, is more of a topic about another school than Georgia, because Dog Nation's Jeff Sentell actually traveled to Zion Logue's hometown when Logue made his announcement. Brings up an interesting point about his recruitment, about how what's good news for Georgia here, maybe bad news for another SEC school. Let me let you listen to Jeff Sentell. It'll set us up for a quick conversation.
It's another happy night in Georgia and Lebanon, Tennessee, wherever you guys might be viewing. We've got the man of the hour, the newest UGA commit, Zion Logue out of Lebanon, Tennessee. We've got all the family here. We've got some of the most delicious, I think it's 5-star cake going on right now. We got Auntie's house. We got everybody in the house. Want to say hello to everybody, and you got about maybe 20 seconds before you meet 6'5.5", 288, 89, 85. He did eat a lot today, so he's probably about 290 right now. Zion Logue. Georgia goes into Tennessee. That some might say that's Jeremy Pruitt's new backyard, and snatches a prize defensive lineman totally kind of different prospect than the one that kind of has that 3-star rating. His junior film and most of his analysis came about 40, 45 pounds ago. So it'll be very interesting in order to see where his rankings go. See if that Georgia bump is out there now, which everybody knows used to happen with the Bama bump.
So you hear Jeff Sentell say that maybe he turns out he liked the Bama bump there at the end.
Well, he had to sneak that in there, didn't he?
So it sounds like Jeff thinks that this 3-star may become a 4-star at some point in time. But before that, first of all, let me just say this. Did y'all notice the beginning of that clip? Now, Jeff is at Zion Logue's house. Did you hear those crickets in the background? Yeah. It's like you couldn't get cricket sound effects that sounded more like crickets if you tried.
Yeah.
Like those are real crickets. They sound just like a cricket sound effect that you'd have if you're trying to make it seem like you're in Lebanon, Tennessee. Yeah. That's perfect. Nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make here is Jeff mentions another instance of Georgia going into Tennessee and plucking a guy in-state from the Vols. How big of a loss do you view this to be for Jeremy Pruitt?
I'll be honest, I don't view it as a huge loss at all. And I, listen, this is probably the bottom-ranked recruit in Georgia's class right now. I think he would have been the second to last ranked recruit in Tennessee's class right now. Tennessee's come down and got some Georgia prospects that Georgia wasn't really recruiting that hard. I think this is in the reverse direction. While I think he could be a good player, I don't think that you look at this. I mean, this is the 22nd ranked prospect in the state of Tennessee. I don't think they're falling apart up there over losing Zion Logue. I think this is just one of those pieces that Georgia really liked. Tennessee probably went at, but probably not full bore. And it just so happens he's from Tennessee.
So I think what's really interesting here is something you just said. I think it's an interesting point that, Tennessee's come to Georgia too. And, at the time when Wanya Morris made his commitment to Tennessee, the offensive lineman from Grayson High School, which is kind of in suburban Atlanta, at the time, Georgia wasn't really recruiting Morris hard, and they're still not now. But boy, when you see Wanya Morris go to the opening, and some people tell you look the best offensive lineman in the entire camp, it really makes that seem like a miss. Now, getting Bill Norton, another defensive line out of Memphis that Georgia did a couple months ago, I do think that's a major loss to the Vols. I guess we'll have to wait and see about how good Zion Logue truly proves and turns out to be here. But it is kind of funny that in that one case, Tennessee coming into Georgia has probably been more harmful or as harmful to Georgia as the couple guys that Georgia's pulled from Tennessee here for this 2019 cycle.
And that's kind of my point, that there could be a Georgia bump. There really could be at some point in the end, but I think this is.
Well, now hold on now, but don't be too callous about that, because what Jeff's point is, and if you're not a Georgia fan, you may think this is reaching, but I don't know that it's unreasonable, that the initial rating came when he was much thinner than he is now.
Yeah, no, but let's point out the fact that Wanya Morris was a 4-star, is now a 5-star. I don't know if he got a Tennessee bump. All I'm saying is this. It's a 22nd ranked prospect in the state of Tennessee. This is not somebody that if you're Jeremy Pruitt, you look and say, boy, we've got to have this guy on board. I just think that it just so happens he lives across state lines in Tennessee, and Kirby Smart valued this guy probably more than Jeremy Pruitt did. Maybe it's the film, maybe it's the growth, maybe it's the size, maybe it's a lot of different things. I'm sure he'll end up being a good player. I just don't know if I put this up as a Georgia really got one on Tennessee right now.
All right, item number 10 in our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. The other coach that spoke at SEC Media Days today was Kentucky coach Mark Stoops. Did you see any of this?
No.
I didn't either. You think this is his last Media Days?
No, I don't. And
wow.
when you weren't on the show, we valued head coaches. I have him right there, number 7.
Crazy.
They've got. Tell me who.
Do you think he's better than 7?
He's been around 5
coaches?
years. He's gotten better every year he's been in the league, or he's at least stayed the same. They've been to back-to-back bowl games.
Give me a couple coaches you think he's better than.
As of right now, I have him ranked ahead of Joe Moorhead. I have him ranked ahead of Jeremy Pruitt.
You couldn't trade. I'm not trading you Moorhead or Pruitt for Mark Stoops.
I have him ranked ahead of Barry Odom.
I'll give you that.
I have him ranked ahead of Matt Luke.
I give you that.
There's a number of them,
but you're not. But Mississippi State fans and Mississippi State, they're not trading Moorhead for Stoops, and Kentucky would love to make.
That's fair enough.
Kentucky would love to make that swap.
I think that's fair, but I don't know that that's as much of a slam dunk as Mississippi State fans want it to be right now. I think that, listen, you're hoping Joe Moorhead's great, but there's no guarantee that he's a great head coach.
I'm the guy that sat on this set a year ago and talked about how he was doing a good job recruiting kids from Southern Ohio and things like that. Honestly, I'm not sure who those kids are because they're not winning football games, so I'm not even sure it really matters anymore.
Yeah, I just don't. I would love to be able to put Jeremy Pruitt ahead of him right now and Joe Moorhead and all those guys, and I think they'll have good years. But so far, Mark Stoops has been around 5 years, going on 6, and he has proven the ability that he can make that football team better, and I got to give him the benefit of the doubt for that. 7's a good ranking for me.
DJ Jamminstar on YouTube says he thinks that Stoops is better than Ed Orgeron. Come on, y'all. Come on.
As a head coach?
Come on. Don't even do this.
What has Ed Orgeron done that makes him better than
What's Mark Stoops done?
I'm saying he's gotten a program from the basement to where all of a sudden they've gone to back-to-back bowl games.
There's
Ed Orgeron didn't do that at Ole Miss. He didn't do that at Ole Miss.
Athlon did a projection for bowls of the day. They have 11 SEC teams making bowls.
I know. All I'm saying is Ed Orgeron, for everything he's been able to do at LSU, he lost a couple of big games last year, and he didn't do it at Ole Miss. He did not have the success at Ole Miss that Mark Stoops has had at Kentucky. So I can't just put Ed Orgeron ahead of him right now.
Okay, that's a pretty strong argument. All right, nonetheless, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life, and today I kind of think this one's kind of funny, even though the guy at the expense of the laughter here is someone that I think of as a bit of a hero. The former Georgia football star, pro wrestling star, I guess now amateur race car driver and truck driver, the great Bill Goldberg. Take a look at this as Goldberg gets on a celebrity track here and loses control of his truck and has a little issue. Here is Bill Goldberg. Cool truck, kind of a ugly wreck though. You see the Goldberg, insignias there. Kind of gets sort of trapped there in the hay bales.
Man.
And I have to admit, I love Goldberg. I think it's cool that he's even able to drive a truck that fast. But seeing him get stuck in between the hay bales like that, I mean, for me, and I hate to do this to him, it just sort of brings one thing to mind. Here's the first thing I thought of when I saw Bill Goldberg stuck between those two hay bales. Take a look at this. I mean, this is really what Bill Goldberg looks like in that video, right?
Yeah, he definitely does.
Can't get the truck out from the hay bales.
Got sideways,
it's Austin Powers stuck in the bricks there.
That's definitely what it looked like to me. Listen, I've been trying to. I'm a racing fan. I've been trying to get races to be on road courses for a while.
Yeah,
that just made it all the less likely that it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, that's Mike Johnson. My name's Brandon Adams. Let me tell you this as we close out here. If you want to keep up with what we have going on, if you want to stay the most in touch with all the latest from Mike and me, the best way for you to do that right now is to make sure you're following us on YouTube. I know many of you watch the show on Facebook. Give us a follow on YouTube. Try us out on YouTube. Gravitate towards there. I think you'll be really glad you did. And for our ever-growing podcast audience, make sure you lean into this show on podcast as well. Even if you haven't listened to a lot of podcasts in the past, it'd be a good thing for you to do to follow SEC Country Live on a podcast. Think about the podcast. Think about YouTube. We're going to have some interesting announcements to be made in the days ahead. That's one of those great ways that you can keep up with everything we have going on. We'll tell you more about that. And look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for more on SEC Country Live.